after a while, it's like, they say selling your soul to the devil. It's like, what was I doing to feed my soul and my spirit? And that's where surfing came in.
Yeah.
And the whole lifestyle came in. And it was becoming increasingly more difficult to be between those two worlds. Of course, I'd show up and I was like tan and beautiful and healthy. And everybody was just like, oh, you look amazing. This is great. And then all of a sudden Vogue was doing an article about me living in Costa Rica. And I was like, and Mario Testino photographed that. I was very pregnant. And I remember I was so hesitant. I did not want to share that part of myself with the world. And I remember I show up and he's like, oh, I want to have you coming out of a limousine in a bikini. And I was 7 months pregnant. And I said, that's so tacky. I'm not going to do that. That's gross. Are you ready, boys?
That's Carolyn Murphy. I'm Jamie Brisick. This is Soundings, brought to you by the Surfer's Journal. The Journal is a member-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Outerknown, Patagonia, Rainbow Sandals, Vans, and Yeti. More like a book than a magazine, the Journal delivers 136 pages of independent storytelling every 8 weeks, covering the people, culture, travel, and art of surfing. To learn more and to subscribe, please visit surfersjournal.com. This episode of Soundings is presented by Costa Sunglasses. If you're anything like me and you spend lots of time around the water, then you know just how important it is to have a good pair of shades. And since 1983, when a group of intrepid outdoorsmen set out to make sunglasses that could stand up to the harsh environments they regularly encountered, Costa remains the choice in eyewear among those committed to life on the water. So whether you're diving in, climbing a board, suiting up, sliding one, leaning back, or all the above, head to costadelmar.com to grab your pair and to see what's out there. Carolyn Murphy is a supermodel, actress, and environmental advocate. I first met Carolyn in New York City in 2001. I knew of her, and I knew her face. In 1995, she landed an exclusive advertising campaign with Prada, featuring her famed pixie haircut, shot by David Sims. In 1998, she was named VH1 Vogue's Model of the Year. She played Dubbie in the 1999 feature film Liberty Heights, directed by Barry Levinson. She was also one of the modern muses on the November 1999 Millennium cover of American Vogue. What I did not know was Carolyn was a surfer, and a very keen one at that. She told me she was moving to LA to be closer to the surf. I'd see a lot of her in the years ahead, in campaigns for fashion brands like Estee Lauder, Calvin Klein, Tom Ford, Gucci, and Chanel, and out in the water at Malibu, a regular foot, often riding a Greg Little-shaped longboard. Today, Carolyn is an ambassador for Surfrider, the Wellness Foundation, Animal Haven, Edible Schoolyard NY, Ocean Unite, and No More Plastic. Along with being a mom, activism is a key component in her purposeful life. We spoke at my Malibu studio. There was a southwest swell in the forecast, but Carolyn was off to New York City the following day for a job, which is to say that her career is still thriving. Carolyn, welcome to the show.
My sexy lisp from my Invisalign. That's really
What's
hot.
Invisalign?
It's like invisible braces.
Oh, I didn't even notice.
Huh. Yeah,
Okay.
50 years old with Invisalign.
Lisp can be a wonderful thing.
It's kind of cute. I mean, I've gotten used to it, but it's not going to be good for making out with anybody.
But you can take it off.
Yeah, true.
How'd you find your way to surfing?
I found my way. I'm going to start laughing. I'm not going to look at you.
Okay.
I found my way surfing through going to Costa Rica with girlfriends in 1998. I grew up around it. I think I've told you before, one of my uncles created the logos for Lightning Bolt, OP, Hang 10, Aussie Surfwear, if you remember that one. So it was around, and my brother and his friends would surf, and I'd kind of screw around with them. But it never really, I was scared of the ocean. I was scared of the water, sharks, sandbars, especially on the panhandle of Florida. But when I went to Costa Rica with my girlfriends in 1998, I was at the height of my career and was feeling quite empty, quite lonely. And I immediately was taken by the country itself, Costa Rica, the biodiversity, and just being out in the water, getting tumbled around, the freedom of it.
Freedom's a nice word.
The freedom was the biggest, and I got bitten by the bug, which is what happens. But it wasn't, just the surfing. It was the whole kit and caboodle.
The lifestyle, the people.
Yeah. Which I had grown up admiring.
Yeah.
Because my uncles were super cool. They were surfing up at Rincon, but I didn't even know what Rincon was, growing up. Because we were between D.C. and Florida, so we were so East Coast. Maybe the Outer Banks, but it was like they were tan and healthy and funny and fun, and my parents were so uptight and strict. I'm like, how are they related? But I think too, in high school, being around some of the surfers, they just emanated this health. And this also kind of deviance.
Sure.
Which was super entertaining.
Yeah. And going back to that time, which was 26 roughly years ago, I think it had more of that. I think the new era of surfing, there's much more kind of little league parents and all the rest of it. It was when I started, which was much earlier than that, there was a defiance. Most parents were not keen to see their kids pick up a surfboard and hang out in those parking lots.
Nope. It was like if I was hanging out at the skate park, well, it was actually somebody's backyard with a half pipe, and I was making out with that skater, it was like, they're bad kids.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when we'd go to Pensacola to see punk shows, Screeching Weasel, Wooden Horse, and my mom would get pissed, and I was super shy and introverted and quiet, but then we could go there. Wasn't like a mosh pitter, but I was there.
Yeah.
And she would get on to me, like, why are you hanging out in those places and with those people? And I was like, but we're straight edge. It's not like the football players and cheerleaders who are like getting wasted and doing tons of drugs.
Yeah.
So I was always like searching for people who were different and had something more than the appearances, which is so fascinating and interesting. Like, where was the depth?
Yeah.
And I remember trying to convince her there was that punk band out of New York. I don't recall. They were...
I think of Fugazi or Minor Threat.
Fugazi was DC.
Yeah, they were DC,
because
exactly.
we would go... I went to 2 of their shows when I was younger, and it was like $2 a show.
Yeah, and they were the main straight edge
Wasn't
folks.
Into Another.
Don't know Into Another.
Where am I pulling that from? But anyway, they would wear the black X on their hand because they were straight edge and vegan. And I just remember like trying to like hammer that home, into a family where everything was appearances.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So surfers were very attractive to me. Not only did I think the men were like hot.
Yeah.
Still have an issue with that sometimes. I'm like, no more surfers. But yeah, there's that lifestyle and what they represented, that little bit of that deviance and subculture. And
yes. 1998, when you started surfing, you were named VH1 Vogue Model of the Year. You were crushing it, as we say.
I mean, that was definitely the all-time high. It was such a surreal time in life, I think, because I had never expected that trajectory. Also, I kind of joke and say I was the Susan Lucci of those awards, because I think that was like the 4th year I'd been nominated and gone and hadn't won. So when I won that year, there was like this shock, like, oh, it actually happened this time. But I was super proud. I mean, underneath it all, really, I think I was 5 years solid into pounding the pavement.
And you were living in New York for the
Living in New York, which I was really not a fan, because I graduated high school 91, went to Japan, loved it because you just work like 6 days a week, sometimes 2 and 3 jobs a day, go home with a wad of cash. I remember I went home and bought a Bronco 2 stick shift. And I was like, I'm so cool. I bought this truck. But then I had to get serious about it because I was flailing in junior college and my parents couldn't afford for me to go to, really good school. And I had faltered my junior and senior year of high school because I was a swimmer competitively and I could have gone to Duke on scholarship.
Wow.
So I was kind of hanging out at that skate park again with that skater, having a good time. But so I was reluctant to get into fashion just because my mom had put me in this finishing school because I was so shy and introverted and more into art, which was just kind of not like the Southern belle, that Southern way. So she thought that I wasn't confident. So she's like, oh, we'll just put her in this finishing school and it'll help. And lo and behold, then these agents from around the world were like, actually, you should model. So I think we were all a bit shocked. At that time, we're like, really? I'm not that tall. And I'm a total dork. I had braces, I had glasses, But so that trajectory after high school was like, oh, go to Japan, make some money. Tried to go to Paris. It was still like the late 80s, early 90s. So there was like this larger than life models, partying, shoulder pads, like everything seemed like big. Hair was big. Those girls just were like big. So I was like, I don't fit in. I'm a dork. I'm such a nerd. I was hanging out at Leal with the skaters. And they were like, did you go to your appointments? No. So I went back home, tried junior college, working at the Melting Pot, which is disgusting and stinky.
Melting Pot's a restaurant?
Fondue.
Okay. Fondue.
Does anybody even eat fondue?
I haven't heard fondue said since 1974.
You were still really young, but maybe your parents were like having
we had
fondue parties.
When I was a kid, exactly.
Right? It was like Tupperware. You'd have fondue parties, Tupperware, Mary Kay. It's like that movie, The Ice Storm, which is so genius.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a funny path. I have a really unique path in the way that I was like, well, I want to be smart. I want to go to school. I want to get married. I want to have kids. I want to be normal. This was something I kept like, pushing in my own head. And then my brother was like, you have the opportunity, like, go take it. He's like, you got to get on the train and ride it and at least try. And that was outside a steakhouse called Coach and Four. Okay. And then that was it. I started going to New York. My grandparents still lived in D.C. and I was commuting between New York and D.C. And really, this is when you'd walk around with a backpack and a massive portfolio. And you'd go into these rooms and people would look you up and down. Wow. They'd have your portfolio in front of them with some test shots. And they'd flip through the pages. If you're lucky, they went all the way to the end. And then they'd slide it back to you and say thank you or ask to take some Polaroids and then...
Wow. So that's kind of what the pounding the pavement was.
Pounding the pavement.
And did it feel really strange or did it feel like this is just this thing I'm doing?
It felt so weird. I felt like I was in an ant farm. I mean, especially in New York City, having grown up, between Virginia, my family's farm, D.C., sometimes the Panhandle, which is like beautiful Emerald Isle beaches. We lived in England. It's like this fast pace. Everybody wore black. It was just super intense. And I struggled a lot.
But when you, around the time of 1998, I would imagine you're entering sort of supermodel status, or maybe you already have. Was that sort of direct bookings, like you didn't need to go on these auditions?
No, God,
really?
No. Jamie, I wish. I mean, I'm just now at 50. That's so funny that you say direct bookings, because I remember I'd go into the agency, and there were these models. It would say special bookings only. Okay. Even Jennifer Connelly, who was like a model before she was an actress. I see. Renee Russo. Like you'd go in and you'd see these beautiful women, you'd see their comp cards and it was special bookings only. Wow. And I was like, oh, I'll never be one of those because I was told I was too pretty. Because my career began in the beginning 90s, so it was heroin chic. Yes. So I was too pretty. They told me I wasn't tall enough, but then when I did meet Kate Moss, I was like, well, wait a minute. She comes up to my nose. So what do you mean I'm not tall enough? But I tried to pluck all my eyebrows off. I tried to I was already dyeing my hair different colors, but it definitely took time to I was trying to fit in. I was trying to, I think you're naturally at that age of self-discovery.
Yeah.
In your early 20s, developmentally. And it was just so cool in the 90s because it was this integration of music and art, and it was so fun, and everybody was way more present. We didn't have the distraction of technology, but I was really trying to find myself and fit in, and I just didn't feel that way. I was like, I'm an imposter. I don't belong here.
Right.
But then I hit a stride.
Uh-huh.
I started working with some of the great photographers. And
So who would they be? I'm curious about that.
well, I think in the fashion industry at that time in particular, you wanted to really get called on by Steven Meisel. And he was like the master
Yes.
of that generation, shooting all of the covers of Italian Vogue, which was coffee table book art.
Yeah.
Really just otherworldly and so ahead of his time in the way that he could reference films and books, which they all did, and they still do. Well, I don't know if they still do, but his interpretation was always just enough. And if you got to work with Steven, you had arrived, you had made it. And I remember that phone call came probably in 96. Yeah, when you get the call from Steven Meisel and you start working for Vogue, that's like, oh, you've arrived. And it was for Vogue. And I was super nervous. And the next thing I know, he started booking me for D&G, which was like Dolce & Gabbana. And I loved working with Steven because he was not out. He had already done that. He had already done that with Anna Sui and a few other designers, Stephen Sprouse earlier, early 80s. So at this point, he's more like, I love my craft. He's very shy and introverted, and I think that's where we connected. When I showed up to work with him, I didn't have to perform.
I see. Did a lot of the shoots feel like performing?
Yeah.
It's kind of what it is, right?
It's constant because it's like you have to become a character in order to adapt.
Yeah.
I mean, they would even tell us, you're going to go to this client and you're going to not speak, or you're going to go this one and you need to speak. This one's more funny. This one's really grumpy. Don't say a word. Don't look at him. I mean, we're always adapting.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what makes or made or break certain models back at that time, was that you had to be able to act. It's another way of acting.
Yes.
In a certain way, is like adapting and becoming a character.
Yep.
And then some of the greats, like Giselle Bundchen, who came much later, she's a dear friend, but she's the first to tell you, is like, she created this whole character. And I think it's a form of protection.
Sure.
For all of us as well.
Yes.
But me being so intensely creative that I really went there. It was like, that was what brought me the greatest joy in being on set, was like the studying of it.
Yeah.
Like the research, the studying, what's the history here?
Yeah.
Who am I going to be today?
Yeah.
And this, having this connection with the clothes and the designers, because it's my job.
Sure.
In essence, to carry out the continuation of the actual item of clothing.
Yeah.
That's at least I took it very seriously.
Yep. And the acting, so in 1998, I believe you shot, but it came out in 1999. You did a film with the director, Barry Levinson, called Liberty Heights.
Yeah, that was cool.
Let's hear about it.
That was so cool. I mean, everything was happening at once. It was amazing. I finally stopped dyeing my hair all these different colors and cutting it. I had Mia Farrow, Rosemary's Baby. I had the Louise Brooks Black Bob. I had the red, hair Romy Schneider. I was literally morphing myself physically into all these different characters. I'd go on set and they would just babu da bang. And so finally, when Steven Meisel and I were shooting quite regularly, he said, and he knew a little bit about my family, my Nan in particular. He said, Grace Kelly, you're like a modern Grace Kelly.
I can see it.
Well, thank you. That's a big compliment. But at that time, I was like, if dyeing my hair blonde and being pretty is going to work for me now, because I was told, 8 years prior that it was working against me. And I think, heroin chic was on its way out. I was like, then great. I can make more money. And that was what he said. He's like, I think now. And sure enough, I started getting covers, single American covers of American Vogue.
Okay.
Because at that point, I had been with a couple other people. And then that's what caught the attention of the casting director, Ellen Chenoweth, and Barry Levinson in New York City when they were looking for this waspy character, which actually happened to be from Maryland, which my family is the whole DC, Maryland, DC, Virginia area. So it kind of seemed fitting. And I just remember my modeling agent saying, hey, just go try this. But he always saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. It's not like I would, whatever. Maybe I just thought it was being professional to show up on time in the 90s and give 110%.
Right.
But what I didn't realize at that time was that was actually a gift I had. And it's now something that I really appreciate about myself that I didn't realize then. And so I went into this casting with Adrian Brody. They brought him in, and he was an unknown at that time. I think he was just starting to work. I knew him from the club scene.
Okay.
DJing, and his mom was the head of Village Voice, which was...
Oh, no kidding.
Isn't that so
I didn't
cool?
know that.
She was there. She's an amazing photographer. Yeah, so cool. So, we did a couple of readings together. I didn't know what I was doing, but I got the role. It was super exciting. I kept it very quiet. I didn't want people to know because I just was like, let me make it through it and, do a good job before I start talking about it. There were a few other models that were really trying to act at that time, and they were so competitive and bitchy. Holy shit. Like, we always say they'll cut a bitch just to get work. And so I was super excited for that experience. It wasn't easy, but I loved it.
There's a thing I find, and it's so interesting. So we're talking for the Surface Journal and watching surfing a lot, as you and I both have. I watch competitive surfing, and sometimes there's a thing of wanting it too much.
Right.
Of course, you have to have everything sort of flowing in that direction, all the intentions and all the things there. And, but there's also like a letting go that has to happen as well. Did you have that, and did that work for you?
What, the letting go?
The letting go, like a detachment, I suppose.
I did.
Yeah.
I had a total detachment because I needed that in order to survive.
Yeah.
And I needed to find a way to have solace away from the industry.
Yeah.
And from, it's also was so exhausting to go to set. And you're there for many hours a day with so many people. And it's, I don't mean that to sound like, oh, poor baby. But it really is. Like, you're traveling, you're on set with, and you have to entertain.
Yes.
Very rarely could you have your nose in a book.
Right.
Which I kind of, I think that's what I discovered about myself around that time was like, I eased into myself. I eased into my success, and I didn't feel the need to perform so much anymore until the camera was on me. So I have to walk in and entertain the hair and the makeup and, which is what they had told us to do years prior. Like, I feel like when you hit that stride, there's a confidence.
Less of the kind of schmoozing that you might do.
Schmoozing, yeah. And I just am awful with the schmoozing. But I think, in comparison to surfing, and I would venture to say it's the same because of the performance level, that you wear yourself out more quickly and you burn out more quickly. Yeah. I think that there is something to be said for a quietude and a mystery, and the gravitas is much more strong when you are fully embodied.
Yeah.
And I think that that is way more attractive than just going balls to the wall.
Yeah.
At least for me, that's the way it felt. And in my observance of peers or even some of the people I'm thinking of in surfing, I was just thinking of this funny story in this moment of shooting with Kelly Slater and Christian Fletcher. So here you go. Case in point.
Was it Bruce Weber photographing it?
Yeah, we were
I think I
doing this
remember hearing
story.
about it.
We were doing this story in Orlando, Florida. This is actually a funny story.
Well, let's hear.
Okay, so I was in this, blonde hair, blue-eyed stride of my career, just before the film actually. And I remember I was having a hard time because, just people expecting me to be a certain way, this kind of genteel, and it was bringing me back to what my parents wanted me to be, my family. And I was like, I don't know how to separate. I was still kind of stuck in the in-between, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I go to this shoot for W, and Bruce is like, you're going to love it. It's like all these surfers and skaters, and this is so you. But I get there, and they put me in all the pretty clothes. So I was like in the satin skirts, and I was in the little sweaters, and I was Grace Kelly, and there was this other model, Angela Linval, who was from Kentucky, and she got to wear like the bandana on her head and the cut off sleeveless shirts and wear jeans, and Patty Hansen was there, Keith Richards' wife.
Yeah.
And they all were kind of the same, right? And I didn't realize, this is how clueless I was, that there was a reason for me to stand out, right? And then there's Christian Fletcher and Kelly Slater. And of course, I was like, Christian's so hot, he's so bad. And like all him and the wakeboarders were like taking bong hits and just being so naughty. The chipped tooth, the mohawk, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And Kelly's there, and we're both Floridians, and he's so sweet. And we did these beautiful pictures together. But it was just such a telltale of that inner youth, that part of me that I still couldn't shake. And that was probably the closest, I think, of, if it makes any sense, of like the world that I wanted to be a part of in surfing, and wanted to like, but then also part of me that was still that rebel and that, little punk rock. It was such a bizarre shoot.
Yes. Well, this is sort of a perfect segue into what I wanted to talk to you about, which is you had on the one hand this sort of very glamorous supermodel life, but then you also had this sort of down home on the beach in Costa Rica surfing life.
Yeah.
So what was it like toggling between the two?
Well, that reverse commute from Costa Rica to New York was really interesting, especially if there were heavy torrential rains and I couldn't get out, and I was supposed to be at a cover shoot for Vogue in Miami. Definitely upset quite a few people, and there were fax machines. That was how you communicated back then. The power would go out, and I loved it. I loved it because I knew exactly what I was doing. It was the perfect excuse to start to cut back. It was a perfect excuse because I needed to take a break, but I'm terrible at saying no, which I've gotten better at in my older age. And I just was, I was feeling so unfulfilled, and Costa Rica was my solace. Surfing became my safe haven. It became that part of me that was for me and nobody else. It was my reprieve. I guess I kind of saw from the outside that it was really hard to balance those two worlds because they were just so extreme and so different. And maybe that's part of myself that thrived on that. Right. But I just loved living in Costa Rica, and I loved having that separateness, and I don't know if I'm answering your original question.
No, but I guess I'm just imagining because having lived in New York, and I met you around 2001 or 2, and we were both in New York. You were about ready to move to California, which we'll get into soon. But I know enough of what the fashion modeling world is like, and I guess they seem like, and I know the surfing world very well, and they seem very kind of spiritually opposite in some way.
They're so opposite. I mean, I think that that's what gave me a spiritual connection was finding surfing and that lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's something that I was lacking living in the loft in New York that I had bought at 26 years old, which was fantastic. How grateful, how lucky I am to have been able to afford that at such a young age.
Yeah.
But after a while, it's like, they say selling your soul to the devil. It's like, what was I doing to feed my soul and my spirit? And that's where surfing came in.
Yeah.
And the whole lifestyle came in. And it was becoming increasingly more difficult to be between those two worlds. Of course, I'd show up and I was like tan and beautiful and healthy. And everybody was just like, oh, you look amazing. This is great. And then all of a sudden Vogue was doing an article about me living in Costa Rica. And I was like, and Mario Testino photographed that. I was very pregnant. And I remember I was so hesitant. I did not want to share that part of myself with the world. And I remember I show up and he's like, oh, I want to have you coming out of a limousine in a bikini. And I was 7 months pregnant. And I said, that's so tacky. I'm not going to do that. That's gross. And I ended up doing the picture nude in the Mercer Hotel bathroom. It's a side shot, so you see how big my belly is.
Okay.
Had this massive tattoo that I had gotten of a koi fish. That also was a part of the rebellion. My father didn't speak to me for 3 months. Nobody, my family had tattoos, but nobody in the industry had tattoos, especially that big. There was like little 90s piercings and tramp stamps.
Right.
But I went for it. But I just remember sharing that part of my life, and I talked a lot about wanting, to work in the school down there, and my father were raising money and wanting to rebuild the schools, and then I just was like, oh fuck, shit, like it's done. I just ruined my safe haven. And that's what started to happen. Like in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, was everybody started going to Costa Rica. Everybody wanted to surf, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's super healthy, but it was my special spot.
Right.
And so, I was like, okay, that's it. I'm out. 9/11, divorce, new baby. I left, and then I was upstate New York, which was fucking cold, and living on an apple orchard, which was, I had the nature part of it, but where was the sun and where was the sea?
Sure.
I was like, I need this. And so was coming out to California quite a bit to shoot with Steven Meisel.
Okay.
And he was living here, which was so unlikely. But that's really what kind of spawned the idea. And then I was working with Herb Ritz, who lived in Malibu, spending a lot of time out there. I started testing for Estee Lauder at that time. And we would shoot out here. And I was like, wait a minute, this place is beautiful. Like, I can have it all here. I have the nature. I can surf. I can raise my daughter in a way that I want to. It's not the treehouse with Family Robinson that I had dreamed about and fantasized about in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
It's a little more sane.
Yes.
A little
Sort
more
of
sane.
split the difference.
A little more conducive.
Yeah.
And then, as I shared with you before, I was kind of playing along with the fact that everybody thought I was going to become this big actress. That was the trajectory. It was like, oh, she's the next big thing. And I was like, I'm going to live in California for myself and my kid. But it's not going to hurt to lead them to believe that I'm going to become an actress.
Yeah. Why didn't you fulfill their expectations in that regard?
Well, the biggest reason at that time in life was because I was a new single mother. I was raised by a single mother, a little bit later in age, but it was enough to know that she had to work and we were latchkey kids. And I needed to be there for my daughter. I needed to be present. And I had the opportunity with modeling where I would work a few days a month and make great money, enough for me.
Yeah.
Now, some people obviously would want more. Some people would be like, I'm going to just do everything I can.
Yeah.
But I needed to be there
Right.
for my daughter, Dylan. And I wouldn't change a thing in that way.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky with the agent that I ended up working so closely with, because to this day, 23 years later, she's my best friend, and she worked with Kevin Huvane, and Kevin Huvane and I are really close. And I saw him not too long ago. He said, okay, now are you ready? Dylan's old enough now. Are you going to start this again? I said, hey, you know what? It's not a bad idea, because not only is she, healthy and raised, and she's out in the world, but I feel healthy and raised and out in the world. And I didn't feel super connected to myself back then. I felt like I was out of control.
Yeah.
So again, for me, having all these reprieves and these lifestyles, whether it was living in Ojai or upstate New York or Costa Rica, those were places that kept me removed and detached, but it was for my mental health.
Yeah.
So much. But also being a mother. And
what was it like being a mom?
The best in the world. But it was also really difficult at times, because I would take her with me on shoots, which I was really fortunate enough that they allowed her to come for the most part. I didn't want to expose her to that world entirely. So when she was about 5 or 6, I stopped working so much.
And how old were you at that time?
Oh God, how old was I? I want to say like mid 30s, mid to late 30s. We moved up to Ojai, which was fantastic because we had a little farm, and really got into the things I loved, like art. I made time, to do more art and ceramics, and had a wonderful community. Was growing all my own food.
Yeah.
And getting reconnected. I call that time period of my life the unraveling.
Okay.
And it was really the unraveling from, who I thought I was supposed to be for so many years.
What was it about the fashion world or supermodeldom that made you take a step back? Was it the lifestyle? Was it being so public? Like, I would imagine you would have been recognized in airports and supermarkets and all the rest. Like, what made you kind of go, I'm not going to lean into this right now?
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wholeheartedly self-preservation. I mean, I guess that's the most simple way to put it, is I very much go by feeling in my life, which would irritate the fuck out of my agent. Just something didn't feel right, using that intuition.
Yeah.
But also my self-care became the priority. It's really hard to do that when you're on airplanes and having to exert yourself so much in that world. And I felt like I had also reached a level in my career where I was like, okay, almost a dozen American Vogue covers, every campaign, every designer, I've worked with them so closely. Every photographer, Helmut Newton, Irving Penn, Mario Testino, Bruce Weber, Michael Thompson, Terry Richardson, this list of these greats that I had my own personal goals.
Yeah.
But I just didn't want to be the supermodel when I wasn't on set. I didn't believe it, for one. I never believed that that's who I was.
Yeah.
Maybe that's humility, but it's also, again, it's self-preservation, it's protection.
Yep. The things that youth and beauty is fleeting, or whatever version of that quote. And then the same could be said of athleticism. And I think that's where, so it's interesting, because if you were to, back in the days of the surf magazines I grew up with, if you flip through them, the majority of the people on those pages were probably between the age of 19 and 30. And similarly, if you look at a Vogue or whatever fashion magazine, did you ever have a feeling of, this is like only a small chapter of my life and there's going to be many chapters after? Or were you aware of that, kind of the hourglass is tipped and the sand is running out? Or was that not an issue?
It's a good question. I think I was always just more in the moment.
Yeah.
Super present.
Yeah.
I never really thought too much ahead.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. I don't know if that's a generational thing. I don't know if that's being unrealistic. Never really thought about it. I'm thinking about it a lot now because I'm like, what am I going to do next? Like, what am I doing? And I am doing a lot of great projects.
Yeah, it seems like
which is again more fulfilling, not as fulfilling in the bank account, but I've had my contract with Estee Lauder for 23 years, which is unheard of in our industry, and I count my blessings with that, just because I know that it has afforded me to say no more often. I never took it for granted, but I saw it as a way to raise my daughter as a single mother. But I think being present is so important, and I say that, and other people are probably like, oh, well, of course. But, with technology, we're so disconnected and so removed. And I see it in my own daughter. She went to Rudolf Steiner Waldorf schools. There was a reason for that. It was, he was this, part of Goethe, the whole transcendental, this scientist that really studied the whole anthroposophical part of the body and different constitutions, and pioneer of biodynamic farming, probably aside ancient civilizations. And I nerd out on all of that.
Yeah, I've learned a little bit about it. It sounds so great.
He's fascinating, and I'm such a nerd with all of that. And I think that to be present is such a gift, especially in this day and age where, he was saying in the industrial age at that time is that people are just going to get so much more disconnected from themselves with technology and industrialization and materialism. And that's always scared me. So yes, I could go and live in that treehouse and be perfectly happy and grow my own food, and that's a dream. But then I've got my brother from outside the steakhouse in my ear going, get on the train and ride. And I just don't feel like I'm done.
Yeah, sure.
I feel like I still have so much more to do.
Yes.
And when I turned 50 this past summer, that was kind of like a declaration I made to myself. And the industry is reflecting that right now because, some of these supers, they're still working. Cindy, Christy, Linda, Naomi.
Yeah.
Even though they're still larger than life in my world.
Yeah.
They really are.
Yeah. But it's so wonderful to see that the kind of body positivity or age positivity has expanded, and it's not so one-dimensional. And the time that you started talking about the sort of heroin chic, it was definitely that kind of wafy, skinny thing, which seemed to have a lot of negative sort of byproducts from it, like bulimia and anorexia, etc.
It was a real thing. I mean, and we were all guilty of trying to look a certain way and be a certain way down to the physicality, which we didn't talk about earlier. But yes, in that era, there was a lot of anorexia, bulimia, drug use, for sure. Now that inclusion is such a beautiful thing to witness because it should have always been like that. And I'm so fascinated. My late agent, who has since passed, he really was a big pioneer of that. And it was like all shapes and sizes, color, gender. And to watch that transcendence over the last few years and to have the industry, which could be quite snotty and judgmental and really it's just one way, to embrace that and to put girls, who are considered heavier on the runway, again, with gender, there's no barriers. And I think that there's a lot of positives to that. I think the only negatives that I see of late, aside, social media, which I think could be very dangerous, is just the illusion of it all because, a lot of it isn't real. There's another dysmorphia with, changing one's appearance. Even if it does make you happy through plastic surgery and injectables, it's really kind of sending such crazy messaging. Having a daughter and being in the beauty industry, I shielded her from so much, but I can't control Snapchat or TikTok.
Yeah. Do you think, thinking about the sort of performative element of social media, and I won't say names, but I can think of people who really kind of ham it up for their posts on their feeds. Do you think, I think about this sometimes, do you think identity is something that you dig into yourself for, or is it something that you sort of put on things and present it? I mean, I think of someone like Bob Dylan, who's so much of the legend of Bob Dylan is built upon the myth, the man, the myth, the legend. And yet so many of his lyrics connect on this human level. They're almost at odds, those two things, to my mind. But I think about that in the age of social media because there's so much performance.
Well, I'm thinking a little bit about Bob Dylan. I remember seeing a few documentaries a few years ago, and I had met Ramblin' Jack Elliott up at the Henry Miller Library
Oh, cool.
at Big Sur, because I used to spend a lot of time up there. And he was the coolest guy, and his daughter was there. And I think about meeting him, and I was like, wow, he's the real deal. He's such a cool cat. And then I watched these documentaries about him and Woody Guthrie, and then I watched this one on Bob Dylan, and I was shattered because I was like, he's so fake. He stole from everybody.
Yeah.
And he created this persona that's not really real.
Right.
And I became an asshole
Yeah.
towards Bob Dylan.
Interesting.
And my daughter's named after him.
Yeah.
No lie.
Yes.
Dylan Blue, Tangled Up in Blue. Dylan in Welsh means the sea. We thought we were so cool when we came up with our name. But, using that comparison, right?
Yeah.
Into social media, and what the question you asked is like, identity is within.
Yeah.
There's no, at least I feel like, for me, so say my success might not be as great as those other models who are putting it on, or let's say this day and age, right? You have these young girls who, what do they call them, Nepo?
Nepo babies. Yeah,
Nepo
yeah.
babies?
Sort of
Yeah.
Parents who are connected. And
Yeah.
involved. Yeah.
No offense to any of them. Mine could have been. No offense. I think that's great that they had a leg up to get their foot in the door, and it's not their fault per se. However, everything is so measured and calculated these days. They have a stylist. They're putting certain, looks together so they get the paparazzi shot, the street style shot. Everything is so measured.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And for me, okay, if that works for them, that's wonderful. But they're the ones that are making all the crazy money and getting all the deals.
I know.
So the anarchist in me, that rebel in me, is like, well, fuck you.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually believing the art. I'm actually breathing the characters. When I arrive on set, I'm going to give you 100%. Every gesture I make when I'm in front of that camera is because I'm appreciating my craft.
Yes.
It is my job.
Yep.
And now they're so far away from that. And that measure of success is for the outer world. But if I know my measure of success is on the inside, it's definitely where it's cultivated for me.
Yep.
And if that doesn't shine through,
Yes.
then you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to stop trying.
Right. When you reflect on your career and your life, I guess the two, what are you most proud of?
Well, I mean, my life is Dylan, for sure. Being a single mother is no small feat. My mom did it. I did it. It's truly incredible. And to know that she's okay and she's doing good things in the world and she's healthy and happy, great. Personally, I would, aside Dylan, I would say just always evolving and challenging myself, staying true to my heart, taking a step back when I knew that I needed to at the height of my career, going to Costa Rica, at another height, going to the farm upstate, another height, moving to Ojai on the farm. There have been these little spots where I've just said, I'm going to check out. You may not agree with me. You may not like what I'm doing. But if I'm not happy, and I'm not right now, I'm feeling burnt out and overwhelmed, it's going to show because your inner is reflected in your outer. So, I'm not a machine.
Yeah.
And I would say career-wise, having a contract for 23 years with a brand that I grew up with and is huge. Even though I will joke about my 2 covers of Sports Illustrated, I'm so proud of them because, again, I was playing a character. You know me. People know me. I'm a dork. I'm not that woman on the cover of that magazine.
Yeah.
And I had some help with the chicken cutlets I told you about that you stick in the bathing suit top to make it look like you've got a CD rack. But, I'm proud of those moments because I would have never ever even imagined to be on the cover of that magazine. I didn't want to do it, but I trusted my agent. I was like, oh shit, whatever, why not try it? I'm proud of all the wonderful images that I've created and I've put out there with some of these great photographers. And I think now at this stage and age in life, I'm more grateful than ever, because sometimes I'll see them and I'm like, wow, that was really good.
Yeah.
That was so cool. We really hearkened that, Romy Schneider film.
Yeah.
Yes.
We really conveyed, that time period. And I feel really proud in that, because it's so transportive. And I think that's what creating images in fashion, it's what's so wonderful about it, is that you're hoping, at least I'm hoping, to invoke a feeling and transport you and carry it on. And I feel more proud of it now than ever, truthfully.
That's so nice. When you were younger, when you were, say, preteen into your teen years, but before you became a model, did you read fashion magazines? Were you looking up to models?
No, I mean, not like most girls were.
Okay.
No, not like most girls were, because I had an older brother who was like driving me around in his Plymouth Duster and going to keg parties, and I was, wanted to hang out with him and the Miller brothers, who were surfing a 10-foot Hudson longboard. And, I just so badly was one of the boys, and I was such a tomboy.
Yes.
And I was so kind of in my own little world and introspective that occasionally I would, be to friends and see a fashion magazine, and they all had like 17 and Sassy, and, they were pretty girls, but it wasn't like my thing. I think the George Michael Wham, or no, was it just George Michael that did that video of the supermodels?
Yeah, I remember, yes.
That was, past the beginning of the MTV generation, but I was still home, stuck in it after school. And so I'll never forget seeing those women. And I just was like, wow, they are so beautiful. Holy cow, I've, never seen a woman like that. So pretty. But again, it was by fluke.
Yes.
In my case, where my mom was like, you need to go to finishing school. You're too quiet. You're too shy. You're too weird. But I'm thankful she did that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if other girls see me in the same way that I saw those women. It'd be interesting to know. My daughter certainly doesn't see me like that.
Yeah.
She wants me to be more like what I portray.
No kidding.
Yeah. She's different, Dylan. She really likes nice things. She would like me to be more out there and social, and she's got, maybe it is her confidence level, I don't know, or I'm just anti.
Yeah.
But she gets on to me, she's like, no, you need to go have fun, you should be going to the Met Ball, why aren't you going? I'm like, because I was on the red carpet last year and friggin' dojo cats behind me meowing to the interview. I was like, this is not mockery.
Yeah.
This is like Karl Lagerfeld would be rolling over in his grave.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think.
Right.
Like, why do we have to try to pretend that it's all okay? Because in my mind, it's not. What happened to the intimacy? What happened to that reverence? Please bring it back.
Yeah. What brings you joy in your life?
Nature. I mean, definitely. That's always been my safe haven since I was a young child. Bringing home birds and mice. My dad, like, you can't rehabilitate these. I would take he liked to work on cars, and he had these oil pans, and I would take them from the garage and put grass in them and put these creatures in my bottom dresser drawer. He's like, you can't do this. and then I just remember, I was like, oh, maybe I'm going to be a vet, and had all these animals, guinea pigs, turtles, dogs, cats, gerbils, hamsters, birds, like you name it. We had a plethora of animals. And then my connection with animals has always been huge. Horses, reading a great book brings me joy, the discovery, like I was telling you, that Susan Casey book, especially because I really loved marine biology in high school. I was hooked on marine biology and Jacques Cousteau, and because there was that special around that time in the 80s. Do you remember that?
The Jacques Cousteau specials. Yeah, sure. The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou is sort of loosely borrowing from there.
You know what? He is one of my... If I could work with Wes Anderson, okay.
It could happen.
Wes Anderson, there's a few people, but he's one. But I think, what brings me joy is that curiosity, the learning, the connection to nature, to animals. I would pretend jumping off the dock and swim for hours that I was going down on some, aquatic expedition.
Yes,
it was so fun. My imagination was so big when I was a kid, and it still is. I just need to start use that to manifest things. But it also was like, that brings me joy. Writing, imagining. It's everything to me. It's like I think if I stop feeling, because I think that's really what it comes down to, is like I'm feeling things, then I'm going to be really scared.
Yeah.
Because it's like surfing too. Even though I haven't done much of it the last few months, when COVID scared the shit out of all of us, and I came back out to the West Coast from the East Coast, and I was like, wait a minute, this is what I forgot about living here. These mountains where the mountains meet the sea. It's so beautiful. The world could end tomorrow, but look where we get to live.
Yes.
It's incredible. It reminded me of that. And then I did this artist residency up at my friend's house, and I was living like literally in the height of it in 2020 at my friend's cabin. Like it was a shed that they turned out. You would love to go there. Louisa Roebuck up on Sulphur Mountain in Ojai.
Okay.
And I had an outdoor toilet and shower, and just that wonderment of meandering, getting snake skins, bones, feathers, the tarantula that loved to come in my windowsill at night, and I had a conversation. You can stay over there. She and I were making beeswax candles. Funnily enough, I guess one of the Scientology properties is across from there. And I said to Louise, I was like, can you put a curtain up? Because I don't want anybody watching me use the bathroom or take a shower. Like we're in nature and I love it, but there are peeping Toms in the world. Yes. But no, I think coming back here reconnected me so much and got me out of that mentality of playing that mother, father, breadwinner role that I had been for a few years. And surfing, too, big part of it. I just remember we all started kind of getting back together again down at the beach, and how lucky we were to do that. And I love surfing. I really, not to sound cheesy, but it does help me connect with community, but also myself.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm not a shrouder. It's not like I'm some... Is that a word? Shrouder?
Shrouper.
Shrouper.
I mean, you can sort of mix them up. Yeah.
Yeah. Not a shrouper, shredder, shrouder. I'm not, but I do love it. I don't care what I look like when I'm out there. That's not my job.
Yes.
When I'm there, it's the freedom. I get to do whatever I want and be a total kook. Because then I see the videos and I'm like, that's not what I think I look like.
I know. We all suffer from that, I think.
Do we all have that?
Most of us do.
I just wanted to be Prue Jeffries.
Yeah, Prue Jeffries. I remember we've talked about Prue Jeffries, 90s top pro from Australia. She was great.
She was so beautiful. Or even Rel Sun. It's like when I think of these women in surfing and that I've, watched, or just even locally, there's so many great girls. Or when Stephanie Gilmore is in town and I watch her at First Point on a friggin' fun shape, and I'm just like her ease.
Yes, it's so nice.
It's such a beautiful thing to watch. It's like she's a bird just coasting, and that feeling, like it doesn't matter. I don't look like that at all, but it's how I feel inside.
For sure. Yeah,
for sure.
Well, thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Jamie.
Soundings is brought to you by the Surfer's Journal and is produced by me, Jamie Brisick, and Jonathan Shiflett. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Our theme song is Give Me a Wave by Oscar Matsumiya and Paz Lenchantin. The Surfer's Journal is a reader-supported publication, made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Outerknown, Patagonia, Rainbow Sandals, Vans, and Yeti. The journal is published bi-monthly. If you haven't done so yet, I encourage you to visit surfersjournal.com and subscribe. This episode of Soundings is presented by Costa Sunglasses, the badge of the explorer. For over 40 years and counting, Costa has remained steadfast in their dedication to not only crafting the most durable, functional, and long-lasting eyewear, but in protecting our waterways and natural resources. Whether you're on the back deck scanning for yellowtail, eyeing a set swinging wide at an empty point, camped out on a bluff at the end of a rotted two-track, or anywhere and everywhere in between, Costas are built to help you see what's out there. Head over to costadelmar.com today to find just the right pair for you, no matter where the water takes you. Thank you for listening to Soundings, and until next time.